Allow me to welcome the moderator of this session today, Sai Satish Vedam. Sai is a senior faculty and head of products at the Institute and was most recently Senior Director of Product Management at Oracle. Welcome, Sai. Very happy to hand the session over to you.
Thank you so much, Menaka. Good afternoon, all of you. For those of you who are continuing with us from morning, hello again. And for those of you who are joining this session, what a way to end the 5-day strategy edition of Product Leadership Festival. We have an incredible speaker, superbly qualified for this to talk to all of us on this topic. But before I introduce Amit Somani, Amit, just want to make sure that you are on, your video is on, and we can see you. Super. Thank
Hi,
you.
Sai.
Hi. And thanks again for doing this from on your break from somewhere else. Truly appreciate it. I know, we had eager audience. So by the way, this event is streamed on multiple platforms. So I've been told Saturday seems to be some interesting insight, LinkedIn live stream day, right? So apparently people are Zoom fatigued and not wanting to join on Zoom, which is fair with so many work related and events going on. So let me get started. Amit is currently a managing partner. In fact, if I take the whole journey and contributions of Amit, we'll spend 30 minutes. So let me not do that. Let me make it short and crisp. But I think all of us ought to learn several things from Amit's journey. So he's currently a managing partner at Prime Venture Partners, an early stage VC firm based out of Bangalore. And it's focused on investing and in disruptive products out of companies out of India, especially in fintech and SaaS space. Of course, PVP or Prime Venture Partners addresses a much needed gap. Now, the gap is a very interesting and important one, a combination of first-hand entrepreneurial experience, operating expertise, and especially bringing meaningful capital to the companies that are looking to grow and establish and build products. Amit builds 25 years of global experience, played leadership roles in products and technologies in companies like Google, Make My Trip, IBM. He was the chief product officer at Make My Trip and helped work with the leadership team, taking the company public on NASDAQ. That must have been a really fascinating experience. And I'm sure, if there is any opportunity, you can share some interesting points around that. Amit has been also named as the LinkedIn India top voices for 2018 and 2019. He comes with a bachelor's from Indian Institute of Technology and Computer Science and master's from Wisconsin University. Now, here's my question, Amit, to you. I would love to know more about this, right? Fusion chef. Are you a trained chef, or are you a DIY person who became a fusion chef? Because I'm asking you this question because I trained as a molecular gastronomist for a couple of years, and maybe you can address that as we go along. But before we get you started, I thought it's important for us to understand our audience here, right? So a quick poll on who our audience is, where they're coming from. I know you have a couple of questions related to the topic before we get into that. So Menaka, if you can bring that topic up, that poll up, to understand which roles are most of our audience coming from, right? So, okay. Go ahead and take the poll and tell us more so that, again, the purpose of asking these questions is to understand and fine tune and tweak and put more emphasis where that benefits you, as opposed to, what all of us want to discuss. So it does look like, from the few people who have taken the poll, they're coming from product management and strategy backgrounds. Not surprising that we have other roles, engineering, delivery, consulting, but predominantly products. Okay, folks, I think we need a little more energy. I know it's lunchtime, but we don't want to really miss this opportunity, to listen from Amit. Great. So let's bring the next one. Amit, I hope you are seeing these results as well, right? So cool.
Yes, I am.
Great. Okay, so for those of you who are in product management and strategy, which role were you in before, right? So this is interesting because when we look at career transitions, in India predominantly, product roles, it gives us an understanding and insight as to are you coming from engineering? Are you coming from business analysis? Are you coming directly? I hear several companies are directly hiring associate product managers now from college. I'm not sure if that's the right thing, but we'll leave that for another day. Great. So it looks like we are having more from engineering, unsurprisingly, especially because people come with technology understanding, product understanding, and natural path towards that. All right, let's get to the final one. Okay, so in the product planning activities as part of your typical day's work, now this hopefully will give more information to Amit to see whether we really want to think of them as a CEO. It's a phrase that has been used ever so often that it created cults around it, if I may say so. Right? People who vehemently disagree with that, people who kind of look at it in a much more generous way. So go ahead, folks, and take the quick poll. Okay, engineering support and defining requirements. It does look like a lot of activities are around what we call product owner or inbound product management, activities. Great, super. Thank you all. Amit, over to you. And we will definitely take some Q&A, and I encourage all of you to ask these questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat window. So, get lost in the chatter. But over to you.
Thank you, Sai. Thank you to IPL for having me. It's great to be here. And back to your point about molecular gastronomy before we get started on product. Actually, I think cooking has a lot to do with product management. And I think some of our listeners might think I'm completely off my rocker. But I think if you think about it, product is really, you take a bunch of ingredients and produce something that the customer really cares for and delights in. Unfortunately, for me, I'm not trained as you are. I'm an experimental chef, and my specialty is fusion. So I like mixing different cuisines. The favorite one I've done is Italian and Thai. But so I'm an amateur weekend hacker, so to speak. But I have to make sure that you invite me not just to come speak on a Saturday afternoon, but to taste the culinary delights that you're cooking up. So I'll have to make a note for that somewhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll also gift you a very interesting book that I'm Cooking Like a Geek. Was something that inspired me, but we'll take that up. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great. So I'll get started, and thank you, Menika, for putting this Menti quiz on. So for folks that are on, please go to this URL and put this code. Just kind of chime in, and I'll get started in just a second here. But please go ahead and put a few keywords that you think describe the top qualities and traits for a CEO, and then likewise we will do a quick one for product managers. So while you guys are chiming in, why even talk about this topic, right, of product management and CEOs? And like Sai correctly pointed out, there are cult-like yes and no kind of followerships on this question, right? I mean, some are like, this is a ludicrous question, some are like, this absolutely makes sense, and so forth. And I thought I'll take something a little bit more provocative for a Saturday afternoon, at least Indian Standard Time, to be able to talk about why this is an interesting question. What are some of the traits that are perhaps common between the two? What are things that are different, et cetera, right? So I see the obvious ones. I'm hoping you guys are seeing this on your screen as well. Visionary, addressing problems, people-centric, etc. Vision seems to have come quite a few times. Completely agree with that, and so forth. So maybe very quickly, Menika, we can jump to the next question just to get a quick feel for this. Responsible for tagline. Okay, I'm assuming that's the bottom line, but fair enough. Confidence, team leader, culture builder. That's a great one. That's very, very fascinating. Talk a little bit about that. Empathetic, very interesting as well. So likewise, I think we should potentially do the one for product managers as well, since there are quite a few PMs here, as well as a lot of product managers who probably come in from the engineering and other kind of business backgrounds. So okay, we've got the next question as well, and here I'm seeing ability to prioritize, communication skills, customer sat, leadership, doer, facilitator. Great. Very interesting and pretty consistent, right? I think there are some interesting insights. Culture was one that was very cool, that was pointed out. I think there's more coming in. Maybe I'll request Menaka to kind of bring this up later during the presentation as we go along. But let me jump over to my presentation. I have a few slides prepared, and given that it's a small, cozy audience, at least the ones of you that are live and on Zoom, happy to take as many questions as you guys have as we go along here. So without further ado, let me bring up my screen here, and I hope it's visible for everyone. Maybe one of the hosts can let me know.
Yep.
Or co-hosts. Okay, great. So let me start with, one of the most, famous and infamous, product and CEOs, perhaps of all time, certainly in, circa 2021, 2020. And I'll start with a quote from Elon Musk, which says, "Great companies are built on great products." And this actually had a lot of bearing on me also choosing this topic to talk about. I think Sai and Menaka and others had given me a pretty open palette to pick whatever topic I wanted. And the reason I think is that there is just so much that products are having influence on the companies and their businesses and their P&L and their kind of outcome. And therefore, I think the futures of products and businesses are going to be quite intertwined. Now, we will go and argue both sides of the debate on whether the futures of product managers and CEOs will be intertwined, aka will many product managers become CEOs, or vice versa. Will CEOs keep tending to products, if assuming they kind of grew in that path? But nonetheless, I think products and tech and businesses are going to be very intertwined. This is even more true for a digital audience. But dare I say, it's interesting to see Elon Musk kind of talk about this, given that he's involved, of course, in Tesla, but also in SpaceX and many other things that classically don't appear to be in the technology realm, right? I mean, reminds me of the famous Mark Andreessen quote from many moons ago that software is eating the world, and Satya Nadella's quote from last year from Microsoft that there is more digitization that has happened in 2 years than in the last 2 months, or the first 2 months of COVID, which is circa Feb, March 2020. So I think these things are going to be intertwined. So therefore, I thought, unlike classical CEOs that have grown up either from a finance background or perhaps even a sales background, etc., will we see a slew of new product leaders becoming CEOs? That is the genesis of kind of my discussion this afternoon. So let me go on to what I believe is a product manager. And there's a whole bunch of pictures here. Of course, I won't multitask too much, but feel free to put it on the chat for those of you that are on Zoom of what you think these pictures stand for. Some are pretty self-explanatory. Some I'm kicked about because I went and found these pictures. But let me just not hold any surprises here. I believe the number one thing a product manager is like, or if I have to choose an analogy or a metaphor, it would be like the conductor of an orchestra. It is probably the most apt metaphor that I have thought about in terms of product managers. So while the orchestra conductor is responsible for the entire music that is created, they themselves are not really playing any music. They're coordinating a bunch of people, they're facilitating a bunch of people, they're inspiring a bunch of people to bring that music together, right? So they have to bring everybody along, and that's how great music is produced. They're like a midfielder in a soccer field, the kind of lady that you see in the middle picture, on the top row. They're like Charles Darwin, for those of you that recognize him on the right, who is obviously most famous for his theory of evolution, but also as an anthropologist, right? So what does that mean? He's very, very insightful about consumer behavior, very, very insightful about human behavior, very, very insightful about, how changing of consumer behavior, changing of, behavior of the species, actually all of us, right, way beyond even humans, are really responsible for coming up with the theory of evolution. So Charles Darwin, very customer focused, an engineer, right? Bottom center picture, a doer, right? So product management is not just about, talking and gyan and, writing PRDs and business requirements. I saw that in the polls that were coming up. It is really about, shipping product. It's about shipping software. It's about getting stuff done. And last, and this is, one of my bosses, and you'll see several names from Google in this presentation today. Deep Nishar, who's now at SoftBank, has this beautiful quote that the product manager has the brain of an engineer, the heart of a designer, and the speech of a diplomat. So the bottom right picture is like the United Nations, and therefore you need a lot of diplomacy and a lot of ability to pull people along and be able to manage people and manage emotions and manage conflicting priorities and so forth. So this to me represents what product is. If we move right along to what I think are great CEOs, and I'll give you a bias. I'm not talking about CEOs of General Electric or Pfizer, or for that matter, even a Tesla, because I work at a venture capital firm as a partner at Prime Ventures. What I'm talking about are typically technology, product, software, internet-driven businesses, which, of course, if you're familiar with the acronym FANGs, right, which is Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, which accounts for almost 20% of all of the profits of the S&P 500, and certainly there's just 5 or 6 companies in there. I'm talking about those kinds of companies, right? And I think over time they'll blend, as you're seeing with Tesla. So over time, I think the likes of the GEs and Ford Motor Companies and others will start overlapping. The lines will start blurring, right, between these two. That said, what, according to me, is the role of a CEO, again, with an entrepreneurial kind of a bent of mind? The number one thing in the top left picture is to be really, really good with numbers, right? Actually, the top left and the top right picture are both around numbers and managing cash and making sure that there's enough in the bank, whether you're getting it from investors, whether you're getting it from customers, which is even better, whether you're whatever it is, right? Executing the company, bringing products and experiences to customers that they will pay you for, or investors will invest in you for, right? At the center, of course, is people, and I saw this in the polls that Menaka ran as well, that a lot of you said about people centricity, about culture, and so forth. Very, very critical skill for both CEOs and for this. And we'll see the differences as well, right? Because there's a stark difference between what a CEO needs to do with respect to people and what a product manager needs to do, right? So CEO, for example, will be a public-facing kind of person, right? It will be the face of the company. So they're interacting not just with all the internal stakeholders, often as a product manager does, but they are potentially interacting with external stakeholders. They may be interacting with the government. They may be interacting with other business partners. They may be, potentially speaking at conferences. They may be doing deals and strategic partnerships and so forth. Last but not the least, right? I mean, both are focused on customers, but the picture in the bottom center, it's really the ability to be able to look at both the forest and the trees. It sounds a little paradoxical, but we'll go into this in detail later. But being the ability to be able to zoom in into the weeds, as well as to completely zoom out and imagine the forest, right? And look at the entire picture in its whole. So I think that is what I think are the other sort of basic definitions, according to me, of great CEOs and great product managers. Now let's go a little deeper and just summarize this. So if I could really summarize it into 3 buckets, this is what I would do for product managers. The number one is customer obsession. Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, often says, build something people want. And I couldn't agree more with him, which is that, who's the customer? What is the problem you're solving? Why is it relevant? Will they come to you? What is the best way to deliver that experience, et cetera, et cetera. So customer obsession is very, very, very critical. The second category I would say is insight and innovation. So all the PMs, best PMs that I know globally, whether they're in big companies, small companies, startup founders, et cetera, have very, very deep insights. They're very, very good trend surfers. They're very good about understanding how not only consumer behavior is changing or business behavior is changing, but also how technology is changing, how a certain change in technology dramatically enables a new wave of product innovation or a new wave of customer service or customer experiences that can be unleashed. So very, very technology savvy. And I think this is going to get more and more interesting and more challenging. So if you're a product manager, I notice some 35-40% people come with an engineering background. If you're not really good with technology, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to write code, but if you're not a geek, a tinkerer, somebody who plays around with stuff, I think the job is going to get harder and harder in product management as you go along. And by the way, I think the same, interestingly, is also true for CEOs going forward, right? Because if you go to the erstwhile Clayton Christensen, the famous author and professor at HBS, whose book on disruptive innovation is really around this topic, right? Which is that there are disruptive innovations that will take companies apart, and not the next quarter to be delivered on some linear roadmap. And last thing is, the product role is a lot about minutiae, a lot about details, a lot about operational excellence. And I think it's very, very critical to understand that and be very, very attentive to the details. I think this is one of the things that people miss. In this case, I noticed a good quarter of you were from the project management background, which is very different than product management. But perhaps operational excellence comes naturally to you because that's your core skill set. But for many other people who come from a classic engineering or other business background or whatever, this is something that you have to do. So almost to the level, I would say that, and this, by the way, is true for a startup CEO, is you should be willing to do whatever nobody else is willing to do. It's almost, that is the definition of the job. So you are the jack of all, and you are the cleaner of all as well, right? So you are where the buck stops. So that's on the PM side. If I jump ahead on the CEO side, like I said earlier, this ability to paint a beautiful picture of the world, many of you said visionary, absolutely spot on, to dream the dream which is not dreamable, right? And at the same time, the ability to zoom into the details, to zoom into the specifics, it's very, very, very interesting, right? And I'll take a quote. I don't know who it is attributable to, but I'll share it anyway, or at least the gist of it, which says that managers, or great managers, and hence managerial CEOs, are those that can define and hit great targets that everybody can visualize and see. So I can say I will ship X amount of product, or deliver Y amount of revenue, or hire Z amount of people, or whatever it is, right? So I can see the target, I can do it. Great entrepreneur CEOs, great product CEOs are those that deliver on targets that mere mortals like you and I can't even see, right? So this would be like size, molecular, gastronomy dish that we can't even imagine that we'll get to eat someday, right? So that is the ability to zoom in and zoom out, pan in and pan out, right? You need to be able to do that. The second, which is they're very good with people. And unlike a product manager, where it is more like a midfielder in a soccer field, or a orchestrator of a musical orchestra, here you actually have to manage people. You have to lead people. You have to challenge people. You have to, quote unquote, help people perform, or even reprimand people, fire people, hire people, etc. So very critical people skill in the CEOs. And by the way, this is to the potential criticism, and I love to get a lot of critical questioning or debate or agreements later as we get into the Q&A, that a lot of times people think that product managers and engineers may not make great managers and leaders. And we'll see examples of those that do are the ones who will become CEOs, and those that don't will probably get left behind. And last but not the least, like I said earlier, very important for folks to be able to manage investors, to manage capital, to manage customers, to manage revenue. So these are the three really critical things, which is manage people, manage capital, and be able to paint a vision and then deliver to that vision. So that's quick sort of CEO skills in a nutshell, qualitatively. Let me jump ahead and now talk about what is common between the two, right? So I put it up, I've not wanted to build up the slide. The number one, and this got triggered in a conversation with the IPL folks, which is all the best CEOs eventually really have two responsibilities. The number one is to make decisions, and the number two is to deploy capital. And capital is broadly, it's not just building a plant, or I'm buying some AWS credits or Microsoft credits or whatever your favorite cloud provider is, Google for that matter. but it is what problems should I tackle? How much money should I deploy on that problems? What are the resources I need to deploy on that? And all kinds of frameworks. If you guys have questions, I'm happy to take that. But the best CEOs, in my opinion, and the best product managers know how much money, quote unquote, how much resources, how much bandwidth to put on what problem. One of the most interesting things, and that is one of the most common skill sets between, I think, the two roles. Decision making, absolutely, right? I mean, a CEO's entire job is to make decisions. If you look at and hear Jeff Bezos of Amazon talk, he's like, my only job is to make great decisions. And even if I make one great decision a day, the company is going to be fine, even circa 2030 or 2031. And I likewise with PMs, product managers, decision making in the face of ambiguity, in the face of uncertainty, very, very critical decision, very, very critical skill or trait. The last one on the first column is equally interesting, and it is called high agency. What that means is, you'll always have things that won't be enough. The market conditions are not right. The engineers have not delivered the software. Timing is not happening. Something happened with COVID. GTM has changed. Whatever it might be. Both great PMs and great CEOs, they have very high agency. So they don't go with just, hey, let me go and, like, this is a problem. What do I do? COVID, I have a terrible quarter. I can't ship software. They find a way to get stuff done. They are problem solvers. They're doers, right? They're not, debaters and discussers and all that, right? They're pretty action oriented. As I jump onto the right-hand side of the slide, there's a whole bunch of macro trends that are happening in the industry. So today, for example, since we started with a Elon Musk quote, there's a lot of talk about driverless cars. So much like how an Uber or an Ola or any of these ride-sharing companies, right, Grab, Gojek, etc., revolutionized mobility, people are now talking about, driverless cars doing that. Now, that's a macro trend. That is a mega shift. That is going to have an absolutely micro level impact on what products, what technologies, what software, what features, etc. you need to build, or for that matter, if you're an entrepreneur, what companies you need to build to be able to address that. So you need to be able to balance trends, which are things that are happening here and now, and customers and consumers are going to ride on from the mega shifts that are going to happen over the next 10 years. So again, you need to both, I think PMs are a little clairvoyant and forward looking, or certainly, gazing at the crystal ball, and so are CEOs. I think a lot of you mentioned communication skills, so I won't say a whole lot there. Until there are questions, we can take them there. But you have to be an excellent, communicator, written, verbal, inspirational, empathetic. Some of you said, completely agree with all of that. And the last one I would say that I can imagine is common between the two is that both of them need to manage a complex web of relationships. So it's not just, it's me and the product, or me and the engineering head, or me and the sales leader. There's a bunch of different moving pieces, and you need to get them to align together. That's what I meant by ecosystem manager. Okay, what are different between these two, right? What traits are different? So I've got four columns there. Three columns, 4 rows. Leadership. So CEO does, is the place where the buck stops. So they do have to lead by authority. And by authority doesn't mean they have to lack empathy or influence or whatever. But unlike a product leader or a product manager, where they may not have a large reporting organization that reports into them, and they're completely and only managing by influence, CEOs do have everybody reporting to them, and they themselves may be reporting to the board or whatever. And so therefore there is this difference. This is one of the places where I think a lot of PMs may not, either by skill set or by interest, want to jump the pool from product management to CEO, because managing people and a large organization, very different beast than managing products, features, roadmaps, trends, etc. But this is one key difference. The second one is CEOs have to learn to delegate a lot. And I think this is, and I think it's easier to imagine for the larger companies, and maybe some of you work for those. But if you imagine younger startups, when I see product CEOs or founders, typically start as product leaders for their companies as they grow, and then they have their first product manager and so on and so forth. they struggle with delegation. They struggle with giving it away. It's, there's too much of like, this is either my baby or I need to tweak it or whatever it is. So I think this is one challenge. The other one is that PMs are inherently very collaborative because they don't have all the accountability and the responsibility, but they don't have necessarily in that sense the ownership of the organization. So they're very good at collaborative skills. So unlike the previous point, I think this helps PMs become great CEOs because they already have this ability to influence and collaborate. So imagine if you suddenly got added, the organizational responsibility and the authority over the organization, you can be a terrific CEO. And we'll look at this example later, but Sundar Pichai of Google, who I overlapped with for a few years back, 10, 12 years ago, he's a great example of someone who was really, really competent on the right two columns and has sort of transitioned to be a great CEO over the last 4 or 5 years at Google. Of course, the strategy for the CEO is really focused on the business holistically, whereas a PM is really focused on the product and the product strategy and so forth. And I know this conference and this particular event is around product strategy, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about that later. Next comes the metrics. So here, of course, pretty straightforward. I mean, you guys can see the screen for those of you there. CEOs focused on the overall P&L, cash flow. Obviously, customer delight would be common to both. Whereas the product manager is much more focused on the customer delight, on NPS, Net Promoter Score. And that, of course, goes hand in hand with revenue or conversion or whatever your kind of core metric is that you're tracking, right? MRR, if you're in a SaaS area or a enterprise software area. So those are the kinds of things that are different. In one case, notice that in particular, the PM is not managing the P&L. So you're typically focused, largely speaking, on the top line, on the revenue, on the customers, on the conversion, whereas a CEO has to manage the top and the bottom line, right? And that is very, very critical. And that, by the way, leads to difference in behavior. So when you're doing this allocation of capital, it is not just like, keep building, keep building, keep building. Sometimes you have to say, we have to stop doing things, right? And you have to make those calls. And by the way, PMs also have to do that, at least when they're working in leadership roles. What is one critical thing that's common to the two, and since the theme of this particular event at IPL is around product strategy, I think where the business and the product intersect are in the product strategy. So the business has a vision about what they want to build for the world, what they want to solve for the customers. The product manager potentially has a vision of how to deliver something, and where they meet, according to me, is product strategy, right? Which is how do you translate the business vision for what the business wants to serve into something that the customers can, leverage and use and use that to solve their problems and so forth. So that's where the product and the CEO kind of overlap, I would say, quite significantly. So some PMs who become CEOs, and I don't think this is a long list. I was surprised actually, but I mean, there are several, and at least two of these I know fairly well. Marissa and Sundar, because I used to be at Google, and Marissa was actually my boss's boss, so I kind of worked for her. But I think these are examples of PMs who become CEOs, some successfully so and some slightly less so, right? But the fact is that the skill sets, Yahoo is an amazing brand name, right? Slack, of course, Stuart is the co-founder, and I think he's been a serial entrepreneur. And in every company, the product has been the business, right? Back to my Elon Musk quote from earlier. And Sundar is the classic example of a corporate, typical product manager, product leader, etc., turned CEO and doing quite well. And again, I didn't get to study many of these, but I know, for example, Satya Nadella is also an engineer turned product turned business leader, right? Of course, he started managing businesses much earlier in his career before jumping from that into a CEO role at Microsoft. So this is happening, and at least my prediction, and you heard it here on a Saturday, is that in the next 10 years, you'll see a lot more product managers and technologists, deep technologists, becoming CEOs of large multi-billion-dollar or even hundreds of billions of dollars companies, because the rate of pace of technology innovation is so fast that unless you have somebody not only in the C-suite, probably in the CEO suite, who understands how quickly products and technology change, I think those companies will lose some of the edge. So those of you that are product managers, I see a great, bright future. For those of you that have aspirations either to become CEOs of larger companies or hopefully even start your own companies. And we at Prime would love to talk to you if you're a product CEO and want to start a company. So getting towards the end of the talk, and I had shared with Menaka and Sai that I will try to keep it to 30-35 minutes. And even though we blocked 50 minutes or so, I'd love to take more questions rather than me kind of be on a monologue. So I just have last 2 slides and then I'll wrap up here. So this is both sides of the coin from the same person, interestingly. Okay. So one is, of course, on the left-hand side, I mean, both the quotes are from Ben Horowitz, co-founder of LoudCloud, and he's co-founders with Mark Andreessen at Andreessen Horowitz, a fairly successful VC firm. I won't read the quote again for those of you that are following this on video, but maybe there's some people just listening in. So one side argues for why the PM as the CEO is a good idea. And the reason is that all the things we talked about, right? They have high agency, their ability to zoom in, zoom out. They have no excuses, they get shit done, etc. Right? That these are reasons why a product manager is a good CEO for product, and by virtue, and I'm extrapolating a little bit from Ben's quote, they can be great CEOs of tech product driven companies. On the flip side, and this is an interesting quote as I was researching my talk that I found also from Ben, so we don't have to go any further, Sai, than your comment about 2 sides of the same coin, where he talks about nothing will wreck a product company faster than the product CEO being highly disengaged from the product. And this basically, to me translates into you are not able to let go, but you're still not have the bandwidth to be a full-fledged CEO, right? I think this is where you need to be able to trade off and decide what you want to be, and really ensure that if you're going to be a product type CEO, you're spending enough time on the product, and other folks are focusing on the sales and the marketing and running the org and what have you. So with that, I hope I gave you some food for thought and to provoke you guys, and we can have a Q&A session. That's all I had in terms of my formal remarks. Happy to take questions, and I will request Sai, I see him already unmuted, to come on board. And this is me, Amit Somani on Twitter and LinkedIn, the Somani. Let me stop sharing my screen here. And Sai, if you can help me.
Yes, I will facilitate some of these questions. So, this is probably one of the most clairvoyant articulation, I would say, of the top PM skills, the top CEO skills, the common traits, and the differences. I think it brings about, a better understanding of, at least in my experience, on why some of the product leaders, evolving from product managers to product leaders, hesitant to get into the CEO roles, right? I mean, there are a lot of folks who naturally kind of get through. And as in the last decade, until the last decade, the majority of the CEOs of the product companies came from sales background, right? And that is obviously changing. As you said, there are not many examples, but that list is growing quite fast, right? And one of the things, and that's why in the top of the thing, the comment was also that there is this 2 groups that keep extreme positions, that you can never become a CEO because of the certain reasons that you outlined clearly, and the exactly the same reasons become for others. So in fact, my brother is a CEO, and I asked him this question about how did you transition into this when you were not doing, or when you were expected to do something completely different before, right? So one thing, of course, is a common comment, but one thing that struck me is get comfortable in doing uncomfortable things, right? I think that kind of summarizes, if you are to get there, every day there are a lot of uncomfortable things which you have not done before. Now you may develop a muscle power to that over a period of time, but there will never be a situation you will say that I know everything, I can do everything, right? So, and every CEO that I talk to pretty much agrees with this notion. And so Now, I think let me look at some of the questions, especially in that area, saying that this is great outlining the different traits, right? For example, as a product manager, you are asked to do lead with influence, which means you don't wield any authority, you don't have, but then you are suddenly expected to now start showing authority, right? ये कैसे होगा? I mean, how does this even happen, right? So maybe help us understand, the audience understand, are there any ways that some folks can think and plan and even work towards it? Because you don't want to end up at a stage where somebody says, okay, now I think we all want you to become a CEO, and then you're taken aback, oh my god, this is a something that. So help us understand, if you can give some guidance on the different traits, the differences that exist, and possibly ways to bridge those gaps, right? Is it acquisition of skills? Is it mentoring? Is it, just jump in with 2 feet in and figure it out, whichever way it is, right?
Yeah, and maybe all of the above. So I think the number one trait, I think, that is true for all successful entrepreneurs, and I think it'll be true for product managers as well, is what we call learning quotient. How quickly are you able to adapt and learn various things? By the way, this is true for your product management skills as well, right? Whether it's technology or a new piece of software or AI comes about or IoT or whatever it is, right? However, I think there is one area which might be a little bit of nature versus nurture. So if you're fundamentally not a people leader and don't like managing people and don't like managing people conflict and all that, I think then there is a different path, right? I mean, there are engineers who will go on to be great, IEEE fellow and ACM fellow and, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe hopefully, Turing Award winners and whatever, who will never be great people managers, right? And I don't think there should, we're not trying to say that every PM should become a CEO, right, or even be capable of. But if you are interested, right, much like a PM, you're already a jack of all. I would encourage you to spend a lot of time volunteering and finding, organizations where you can lead with authority in terms of the people side. It could be just a cross-organizational workforce. It could be something not even tied with the job of something, right? Because I think the decision-making skills they have, people savvy they have, influence they have. So I think expose yourself to situations where the people part of the equation and the buck also stops with you, right? And especially, I don't know what is the broad age demographic of the audience or the others on the live stream, but look at every opportunity to lead. I mean, even little things, it sounds very, metaphoric, but being a midfielder in a soccer field or a captain of a cricket team or whatever will teach you as much and more about, people leadership as, running a team of 10 engineers or 10 product managers or 10, I don't know, some work, like a volunteer thing in the Red Cross or in Akshay Patra, right? So just find ways. But at the same time, I do acknowledge it is not that every PM will be a CEO or should even be attempt to be. I think it's not that would be too far of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it also is important to even figure out whether that is even important for you, right? Or even whether you want to even take that step. So you're saying, assuming that that is of interest or importance, one way is to do that is, of course, identify the gaps in your skill sets, right? And, are you a great negotiator? You probably have been influencing by good storytelling, by bringing persuasion skills and all of that. But then there is a gap in terms of, if people are directly reporting to you, what kind of approach do you take? So there's a gap there, right? So multiple gaps. And how important do you think is actually going and acquiring those skills? First thing, right? Now, all of us don't have the luxury of getting the opportunities to learn on the job, fail without consequences. So better be prepared to some extent. Of course, nothing beats the experience of doing it. So would you recommend people to actually identify those gaps and upskill and reskill in those areas?
Absolutely. By the way, that's true for any profession. Forget product management. You could be a sales leader 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It's all enterprise software. Now it's SaaS. Now it's inside sales. Now it's inbound. Now it's outbound. So I would say absolutely find ways. And if you're a product manager, you already know that raise your hand when nobody else wants to raise their hand, right? Like right now, ask questions.
Yeah,
that's like the best way to learn.
Exactly.
So I completely agree with you, Sai, that if you're interested, I think it's fine. Otherwise, I think deep competence is also very, very valued in this new age. So,
okay, great. I think, I'll pick one question from the LinkedIn where people are asking is it's easy for a PM to fall in love with their own idea or product, right? And I have a quote which I often used to repeat to my teams is, don't fall in love with the product because it doesn't have the capacity to love you back. Fall in love with the problem, obviously, right? But how would we make, or what is a suggestion to overcome this? If I'm so passionate, and especially when you're involved right from the beginning, right, to do this, are there any simple suggestions to say, step away from that, don't get too emotional, don't fall in love?
yeah, it is a very fine line, right? But I think there is enough and more tools that are out there.
Yeah.
So, for example, even little things like customer discovery, customer research, net promoter score, which I briefly mentioned, conversions, right? Watching the user sessions, etc. So I think unlike 10, 15 years ago, or when there was only large monolithic enterprise software not shipped on the cloud, you'll write something now, the customer will use it after 18, 24 months. Now the feedback loop is much faster. So let data walk you out of it. In fact, one of the things that people used to love and potentially not like so much about Marissa Mayer was even the font, color blue on the Google homepage, the pixel code for that, the hex code for that was determined by an A/B test, right? That was like extreme over-indexation on data. But I think there's enough feedback loop on the data side. On the human side, I think cultivate people who are constructively critical of you. And I think this is true for great CEOs as it is of great product managers. So don't just find people who love it and say, yeah, Sai, everything's great, wonderful, you're amazing. But find people who will say, no, this is not going to work, that is not going to work, this doesn't make sense, that company failed, this one is not doing well, etc. So at least even then you still can make the call, because you do have to, if you don't have the passion and the love and the drive, you're not going to be able to ship anything or take any decisions. But at least it keeps your gut a little bit in check to have, true constructive critiques, right? I mean, you don't want the naysayers for whom nothing will work, but you want people to say, here are 3 reasons why I don't think it'll work. Now, just no different than building your MVP, you can go and construct falsifiable hypotheses for those things and not just answer it at an emotional level saying, "Arey, Sai to aise hi bolega." No. Let's go disprove these things either intellectually or by gut or by data, or at least keep an open mind to it. So those are.
Yeah. So Shailesh, if you got that, and just to quickly add on to that is focus on the problem, focus on the pain point, focus on the need, and you might come up with better ways of solving it than you are obsessed with the current idea or the product, right? So that's another. So one more question: how much should, from LinkedIn, Anushri asks, how much should a PM be involved in hands-on operations stuff? Now, I'm sure there are lots of operations here, but I'm assuming product operations, let's say, right? How much do you think?
Yeah, the PM has to be very, very involved, right? And there's a difference between, like if any of you in larger companies, or even if you've ever had a manager, so the difference between managing, completely delegating, and micromanaging. I'm not saying micromanage, right? So you can't be checking in every 5 minutes. And unfortunately, and I know I'll probably annoy a few people on the call here, project managers tend to have that DNA, right? Did this happen? Did this not happen? Okay, that's fine. But I think manage you must, you must, be involved you must, because otherwise you have no hope in hell of shipping great product and kind of being in the loop.
Yep.
So I think you have to find your balance between this kind of completely delegate and trust versus trust but verify versus micromanage every little pixel of every little scrum meeting every morning, right? That probably won't win you many friends in engineering or design or whatever other collaborators that you have. So find your balance. But if you must err, I would say err on the side of do more involvement, not less so.
Yeah, until the team tells you back off, right? So even then, don't try
and
to
listen.
Yeah. So the quote that comes to my mind at this stage is, it's not done until it is shipped. So don't just think that people worked on developed features, testing is over and my job's over. Super. I think there is one key takeaway, and my suggestion or advice to the audience here is, print these slides if you can, and paste it wherever you wake up and see in the morning, because these are, distillation of years of experience and wisdom, right? So there is a lot to unpack in each of those, and hopefully we have done some of that here. But I think it is really synthesis of all those. Thank you so much, Amit. Appreciate you taking your time on your break. Just before we let you go, a couple of small things. I think Shailesh gets the best question for today, Marshall Scholarship eligibility. Congratulations. There is a leaderboard, by the way, for all of you folks, where you can actually join. Ask your friends to join the remainder of the sessions that we'll have during the product edition, design and data, and just sign up to that and refer them. They get to join, and you get to win some cool stuff. There is a burgeoning product community that one of the main purposes of doing this festival is to build this community and nurture the community in India. We need a lot more people focusing on solving problems, right? And do join this community. It's free, community.productleadersforum.org, or scan the QR code, and it's a mobile app. Now, this is particularly interesting and exciting to me personally. There are a few folks from the product leadership community as well as IPL alumni are doing this benchmark study, right? And it's a very interesting study to understand the state of product management and product leadership in India. Your target is to get to 5,000 people, product managers and leaders, to get their insights and information. Once you do that by scanning this code or the URL interesting.today/benchmark study, you'll get a soft copy where you will find definitely very useful insights on careers, on salary trends in product management, actionable tips to excel in that role, and for CXOs, some experiences about designing a product organization. Right. Again, Amit, thank you. As a token of appreciation, I know this is not the way. I will definitely host a dinner for you with some molecular food, and then we can savor that. But until then,